All right, so we're going to begin. My name is Ray Lorenzoni. I'm a member of the Society of Pediatric Echo Education Committee. I'd like to welcome everyone here. We are tonight going to be having a great discussion with our presenters, Dr. Anthony Chang from CHOC and Dr. Charitha Reddy from Stanford, about artificial intelligence in pediatric imaging. And it's going to be a topic about what their views are on what the future of this looks like, where we are now. And we're going to have an opportunity for questions at the end. I just want to mention before we forget, because oftentimes we kind of run over time having great discussions at the end. We are going to take a hiatus as for the speed sessions for November and December for the holidays, because they happen to fall around the time that we usually would meet. But our next session will be January 24th on a Tuesday, and that will address quality improvement in pediatric echocardiography. And we should have a great discussion with a sonographer and a leader leaders in the field about that. So I'll invite Dr. Reddy to share your screen. I'll stop sharing mine. And Melissa, if you want to introduce.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Melissa Wasserman. I am on the SOAP Communications Committee, and I am so happy to welcome Dr. Charitha Reddy. She is a clinical assistant professor at Lucile Packard Children's Hospital in Stanford, practicing with a specialty in advanced echocardiography. Her research focus is the intersection of machine learning and cardiac imaging, with a particular interest in real-world implementation of novel technologies. With that, I will give it to Dr. Reddy.
All right, can you guys hear me? Now it's working. All right. So good evening, everybody. I'm very excited today to be giving the SPEED seminar on AI in pediatric echocardiography. So thank you for having me. Oh, for some reason, my next slide isn't working. All right. So my goal for these 10 minutes are to answer the hard-hitting questions that I'm sure everybody is thinking about. Will robots actually replace us? What is inside the proverbial black box of AI? And when is the future coming? In my experience, when most non-technophiles are confronted with talk of AI, they fall into one of two camps. The first being, will robots take over our jobs? And the second camp being, thank goodness, robots will take over our jobs while we put our feet up and relax. But the truth is, we're far away from both scenarios, particularly in healthcare, where so much of what we do requires nuance. In reality, the opportunities for AI to aid in patient care are immense. AI is ideal for a few different areas where we don't have human expertise yet, areas that require customized care like precision medicine, or where there are immense amounts of data that humans are unlikely to be able to mine, like the human genome. And lastly, areas where tasks can be automated to increase efficiency. Because AI has the potential to mine this avalanche of data, it does have the potential to identify novel patterns that can identify high-risk patients or predict complex outcomes. AI applications are expected to save the US healthcare system approximately $150 billion by 2026, especially as there's a significant focus on prevention with these AI applications. Implementing AI applications into healthcare workflows has the ability to reduce error, ease workflow, and improve overall quality, which improves quality of life for healthcare providers. Lastly, pediatrics is often left behind, but improving our vocabulary and knowledge can increase access to novel technologies for our patients. To drill down further, I want to talk about how AI can impact our particular area of expertise. AI could improve multiple areas of the imaging chain, as shown here, including optimizing image acquisition and quality, automating measurements to reduce error and variability, automate interpretation similar to EKGs, and decision support and automated risk stratification to improve patient outcomes. Despite the challenge in obtaining large pediatric data sets required for machine learning, some of our colleagues are already working on many of these target areas. This table from a recent review article lists some of the exciting work being done in pediatric and fetal echocardiography, including papers on focused on acquisition, optimization, view classification, segmentation, diagnosis, and cardiac phenotypes. Now, I want to dive into some of the definitions and fundamentals of AI and machine learning. First, what does artificial intelligence actually entail? Artificial intelligence is the broadest category and encompasses anything that makes a computer do a task that a human has done. For example, autopilot commercial planes. Machine learning is a subset of AI that focuses on giving computers the ability to actually learn without being explicitly programmed. This means it can have a reaction or a change based on learning something. Machine learning requires more computing power and increased data. Deep learning is a further subset of machine learning. Deep learning typically uses the concept of artificial neural networks to try and replicate what happens at the human neuron synapse, where there is input, followed by feedback between neurons, and then there's an output. Deep learning utilizes more complex data and navigates the nuanced relationships between the data. Machine learning can be divided into a few different types of learning: supervised, unsupervised, semi-supervised, and reinforcement learning. Currently, supervised learning is the most commonly used method, particularly in tasks that are related to cardiac imaging and image analysis. So I want to talk about supervised and unsupervised learning in a little bit more detail. Before you roll your eyes about another comic in this presentation, I want to point out that this one is not just for the humor and is actually a learning tool. On the left panel, which illustrates supervised learning, there are some important things to note. In this panel, there is a human guiding or supervising the machine towards the right answer. Looking a little more closely, this means that the human is setting the rules of the game by defining an object and then providing feedback when the answer is wrong and when the answer is right. In the right-hand panel, which represents unsupervised learning, not only is there no human, but the images provided to the machine are in a jumbled, non-labeled group, including both apples and bananas. The machine then creates its own version of the game by separating out the fruits by clustering them, presumably by using similar qualities. As you can imagine, there are pros and cons to both. In a very simple overview, supervised learning utilizes large amounts of labeled data to train a machine to do what a human can do. By showing the machine multiple pictures of an apple with the label apple, the machine can then move forward to identify what an apple is on new, never before seen data. Supervised learning can therefore increase efficiency of a task and decrease variability and potentially decrease error, but it cannot surpass human accuracy, nor can it completely avoid human bias since it's trained by a human. Unsupervised learning, on the other hand, utilizes large amounts of unlabeled data and clusters the data based on patterns that it identifies. Since the machine can digest more data than a human might ever be able to, there is potential for the ability to find novel patterns that have never been discovered. However, unsupervised learning is overall less accurate as there's no guidance and the patterns may not end up having clinical relevance. Semi-supervised learning utilizes a mix of labeled and unlabeled data and can have the benefits of both supervised and unsupervised learning, while the last column, reinforcement learning, is reward and error-based. The machine learns to identify the correct output by trial and error. Each method of machine learning has different data input types and different approaches, so they also provide solutions for different types of questions. Diving a bit further into deep learning, I want to touch briefly on neural networks and utilize an example that goes beyond apples and bananas. The concept of a neural network is based on the human brain and the ability for neurons to make connections and also feed back to one another. Let's think about the identification of left ventricular hypertrophy. When your brain takes in a parasternal long axis view and you're asked to determine if this patient has LVH, your trained mind knows exactly which areas to flag as regions of interest. But a machine, on the other hand, is kind of like a child, but with better vision. All the machine sees are black and white and edges and pixels. It can't automatically make inferences about the image yet. Next, you identify multiple parts of the heart in the long axis view indicated by the arrows, and also provide information about which hearts are hypertrophied and which aren't. These are called the labels. A neural network exposed to enough data will eventually identify that certain areas marked by the arrows are more important than others. The hidden layers are meant to imitate human neurons, and this is where the areas of interest are given more weight. And then the algorithm then trials whether the combination of weights are successful at arriving at the correct result. Here, the neural network has identified that the red and green arrows should be assigned more weight in order to correctly identify left ventricular hypertrophy. So let's put it all together in order to show how an algorithm can be developed. In the first phase, the training phase at the top, you start with raw data and the associated labels. In this case, normal hearts versus left ventricular hypertrophy. The algorithm identifies important features: the edges, the texture, the shape, the intensity, the pixel orientation, or even patient-related labels like height, weight, age. The neural network determines the vectors and assigns weights to these features and generates multiple algorithms. Then the best performing model is selected. In the next phase, the testing phase on the bottom row, the selected model is shown fresh or unseen data to evaluate how well the model performs in identifying patients with left ventricular hypertrophy. Some challenges that can occur include too restrictive a model that only works on data that's extremely similar to its trainings data. This is called overfitting and makes the algorithm not generalizable. An algorithm that doesn't sort out well enough may need further tweaking of the features and vectors. To summarize, when thinking about how to apply machine learning to your clinical space, you start with establishing a clinical question. Will machine learning improve what we're already doing now? Then find a suitable task to improve and acquire the data. The quality of data is super important. A model is only as good as the data that it is trained on. Ensuring the data is appropriately processed and labeled and that there's adequate computational power is important as well. Lastly, choose an appropriate type of model for the question that you're asking to test accuracy. Lastly, to talk about the future and how we can all get involved. Increasing knowledge and vocabulary about AI can improve engagement and decrease mistrust of new technologies. Knowing more about it helps make it less of a black box, and I hope that today's talk helped. Next, development of pediatric algorithms often suffers from lack of adequate data. We need to think about ways to collaborate and test algorithms across broad populations to improve generalizability and minimize bias. Thirdly, for now, we could look to the adults. What have they already done with the infrastructure that they have, and how can we adapt it to our unique population? And lastly, we need to think about how to bring algorithms off paper or the computer and to the bedside, and make sure we do that with appropriate ethical oversight and safety. There's still a lot to be done before machine learning research becomes run-of-the-mill, but the foundation is already there. Thank you so much for your attention. I look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy, so much. We'll take questions at the end. In the meantime, if you have questions that you'd like to put in the chat, we will look to them and try to address them at the end. Dr. Chang will be next. Anthony Chang is a pediatric cardiologist and medical director of the heart failure program at Children's Hospital of Orange County. He serves as the Chief Intelligence and Innovation Officer for MI3, Medical Intelligence and Innovation Institute, and that's supported by the Sharon Disney Lund Foundation. The institute is dedicated to implementing data, science, and artificial intelligence in medicine, and it's the first institute of its kind in a hospital. Dr. Chang completed his Master's of Science and Data Science with a subspecialization in artificial intelligence from Stanford, and completed a certification on artificial intelligence from MIT. He has a Master's of Business Administration, Health Administration from the University of Miami School of Business, and a Master's in Public Health in Health Policy from the Jonathan Fielding School of Public Health and the University of California. He's the founder of the Pediatric Cardiac Intensive Care Society and the Asia Pacific Pediatric Cardiac Society. He has started a Pediatric Innovation Leadership Group who has a biannual symposium, Pediatrics 2040, Emerging Trends and Future Innovations, and that has become a catalyst for the International Society of Pediatric Innovation. Each summer, MI3 summer internship program, founded by Dr. Chang, mentors close to 100 young physicians, and he recently completed a book called Intelligence-Based Medicine. He's the founder of Artificial Intelligence in Medicine, AI Med, which many of you may know, and has meetings throughout the US and Europe, and as well as Asia. Thank you, Dr. Chang, and you may begin.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm going to confirm that you're seeing my slide, and I just moved to my second slide.
Yes.
Okay, so the good news, I know Teresa did a great job giving you a brief overview, and I think for some of you, maybe the first time you've heard terminologies like that. So that's the daunting part, is you have to get into a new domain as a pediatric cardiologist. But the great news is that I can only say this in front of pediatric cardiologists, I really think that pediatric cardiology is the best field to accommodate artificial intelligence, given its breadth and depth and complexity of patients. So, and it couldn't have come at a better time. So in the middle of this pandemic, we, if I were to give a grade for artificial intelligence, I would give it a C+, only because the IT and data infrastructures are still relatively inadequate. It's not technically the AI's fault, but since AI has to rely on a good infrastructure of IT and data, we have suffered through this pandemic in terms of AI. So I'm going to make my talk, since this is a speed talk, really short and fast. Three successes in the last decade or two, 3 disappointments, and 3 future directions. So this is what happens when you use an artificial intelligence inspired tool, and when you put in cat, as I did, this is what comes out. So relative success, even though it's a simple one-word ask. A few successes. One is the use of something called convolutional neural network, and I'll have a picture for you in medical imaging. So that's right up our alley as pediatric cardiologists. So the chest x-rays with pneumonia, fundus photographs for diabetic retinopathy, and head MRI for stroke detection have now been adopted, and the best news is getting reimbursed. So hopefully in the near future, they'll happen for what we do as pediatric cardiologists as well. So the key thing is getting approved, adopted, and reimbursed for sort of the complete cycle of adoption. And I think the other big development in the last couple of years only is the increase in using this deep learning for not just static images, but also moving images like echocardiograms and endoscopic examination. So this is one of the studies that we have done at Children's Health Orange County. This is looking at an automated way of looking at PDAs. So we start with relatively easy structures, although as you know, congenital heart disease and imaging, there's no such thing as a really, really easy image. And so we achieved fairly high degree of accuracy. We're going to move on to other lesions as well. And this is using something called convolutional neural network, so a CNN. Probably going to use something even more trendy, which is something called transformers. As a matter of fact, our data science team and I just discussed that this morning. So improving tools are very, very big in imaging. This is just before I came on to this talk, a friend of mine from Italy, who's a pediatric cardiologist, asked me, is there any work being done on maternal fetal cardiac coupling and using AI? And I said, well, I'll see. I don't think I've heard of anything. The one paper that is out there now is looking at, again, using CNN to look at maternal fetal electrical signals, cardiac signals during gestation, and looking at that to understand the coupling. So look at AI and deep learning and convolutional neural network as a way to really understand better how data is working. The other 2 big wins for AI, in my opinion, and it does have some relevance to cardiology. The second win, I think, is using deep learning for 3D protein structure prediction, something that used to take weeks and months and years even, is now hours and days. So that will have tremendous impact on how we understand disease and drug discovery and drug design, vaccine design, and all of that. So that's a second big win. The third big win, for those of you who do any administrative work, there's something called robotic process automation, which is kind of primitive dumb AI. I call it dumb AI because it just repeats what humans do. And for healthcare administration, is going to be even bigger this coming decade. It has a lot of advantages over humans doing this. So in terms of, I noticed that next talk is on quality improvement. So even quality improvement will be, I think, partly supported by robotic process automation in the future. These are some honorable mentions of AI. One is the community is really building, including a pediatric centers of AI medicine group. It's a coalition of over 20 centers now. So, and I've listed there the other ones. Okay, what are disappointments? So if you type in patent ductus arteriosus and echocardiogram, this is what you get from the AI tool. I have no idea what that organ is, but it sure doesn't look like a PDA nor an echocardiogram. Disappointment number one, lack of continual access to healthcare data in all types of forms. This is a universal problem across subspecialties around the world. And I think we need to work on healthcare data, which is good because we kind of need to work on healthcare data anyway. So some of the solutions for the future will be use of synthetic data, which I won't have time to go over, as well as federated learning, which is learning across institutions without using raw data. The power of big data. This is our group turning in a paper to JAMA, looking at what happens to pediatric cardiac patients with COVID. And we kind of uncovered 200,000 patients that had a cardiac event, not just congenital heart disease, obviously. So you never see those kinds of numbers in studies otherwise, unless you use big data and machine learning. Second big disappointment is insufficient clinical relevance and impact of the studies that are being done. I think that only can improve with clinician involvement at all stages of projects. So that's the good news for our pediatric cardiology colleagues here. Get involved with projects, as Charitha was saying. The third big disappointment in my mind is the relative poor performance of AI-enabled decision support. AI decision support is a totally different ballgame compared to medical image interpretation. I think we'll conquer that area, but it's going to take a lot more work and a lot better AI tools. And I listed some of the other reasons there. So, and again, involving clinicians from the beginning will help. And these are honorable mentions of disappointments. And I think the biggest one to me is the relative slow adoption, probably partly because of trust and education issues for clinicians. So in the future, so hopefully if you type in patent ductus echocardiogram, this is what you're going to get. And I think within probably a few years of that, wouldn't it be amazing as pediatric cardiologists, you just say, I want to see an echocardiogram of a anomalous left coronary artery from the pulmonary artery and this view, and hopefully the right picture will pop up. And these are hype curves, so AI and emerging technologies, that's important. So number one, future paradigm I think needs to happen and can happen is a healthcare learning system using real world data, and not just electronic records, have sensors, shared learning. So essentially developing a healthcare learning system that is akin to a nervous system. Wouldn't that be wonderful? And that's terrific for education and training. And this is just a small demonstration that Charitha as well is very familiar with this project that we're both involved in, is the build up of a pediatric network, expert network, so that a pediatric cardiologist in Orange County can have a real-time echo being looked upon by a pediatric cardiologist in Rome, which happened this past Friday. And was just a very emotional and significant moment, I think, to be able to do that. The next thing we're going to do is import an AI model so it could be automatically interpreted anywhere around the world. Second big future paradigm, I think, is the concept of a digital twin, which is virtual copies of patients. And this is where I think AI is going to really shine for our future congenital heart patients, where you have a combination of statistics and mechanistic models. So you don't have to have groups of patients and figure out what to do with our patients. Each patient will be his or her own control many times over. how amazing would that be to figure out what surgery, what therapy would be best? And the third future direction would be the beginning of a cognitive AI era away from the deep learning era, which is where we're in now. So I think in the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see more and more what I call smart AI in artificial intelligence, and not just computational intelligence, but overall intelligence, which is, again, mimicking the brain. Honorable mentions for the future. I think we're going to really go back to human-centered AI in healthcare, which is a great way to think about things. And the reason why we need all of this is because we have just way too much data and way too much information that can only benefit from appropriate deployment of artificial intelligence. So think of artificial intelligence as a resource that can be used throughout the hospital and throughout the heart program. And I won't have time to go over these, but think about going into a foreign domain to learn something to bring back to pediatric cardiology, not just for AI, but other things as well. Work closely with your data scientists and give everyone a reason to be part of your symphony on your trip to Mars, which is, I think, hopefully will take that. I won't have time to show you pictures of my daughters. The American Board of Medicine is where you can learn AI for the first time. It's based on a book that I wrote. You can have a 1-day crash course or a 2-day intro and advanced courses. We have advanced course coming up in November. And here's the amazing faculty with all the amazing organizations that help to support it. And also the Global Summit of AI Med is in June of next year in Southern California. And I want to thank my many good friends and mentors at Stanford, give me the inspiration to write the book. We're writing the 2nd edition. And then there's an intelligence-based cardiology book coming out early next year. And I want to thank my home team that gives me time and support for talks and opportunities like this. So thank you, Ray.
Thank you, Dr. Cheng. That was great within the 10-minute time frame. Thank you. I'm going to open it up to questions. You can either put them in the chat or raise your hand, and we can certainly call on you. Melissa, did you have one to start?
These were both such great talks. I had no idea how far along we were in pediatric cardiology AI echo. Like, I absolutely just learned so much from both of you. Thank you so much for sharing all this information. Have either of you have been using it real time?
We have projects that we've been working on similar to kind of what Dr. Cheng had mentioned.
I think I saw an abstract that you wrote, right?
Yes.
Yeah, on ejection fraction.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so
but it's pretty difficult to actually implement those things in the real world. And so I think that's what we're working on right now, is how do you actually get it from kind of what you published on and really get it out to the real world, for sure.
But the results for your ejection fraction seemed really great. Could that be used maybe for like oncology patients?
Absolutely. I think you're kind of getting to the goal of what we would want to use that for. I don't think that technology where we're kind of automating ejection fraction is necessary for us as pediatric cardiologists, but it's super useful in areas where people don't have access to that technology, either rural areas or non-experts that might be doing echocardiograms, things like that. So that might be the absolute use cases for some of the things that we would work on for AI and pediatric echo.
Remember, Melissa, I remember in my career, I used to see echo reports with ejection fractions written down, and we were faxing these forms to different, I mean, it's just like could not be more backward. And I think some of the studies are still doing that. So in my future world, all the studies will be the information, not the data, because people get nervous about the data, but the information and the analytics will be shared in decentralized fashion and instantaneously. So you don't really have to go through a lot of angst about sharing data and not getting things in a timely fashion. Everything will be fairly automated. 10 years from now, we'll look back and almost laugh at the things that we're doing today. But hopefully I see a brighter future than ever before. And again, as as a pediatric cardiologist myself, I think shame on us if we don't embrace AI in the next decade, because it's such an amazing field with the images and the complexity of the patient care and the lesions. This is just custom designed for AI in a big way.
Nice. Yeah. Sunny Dong in the chat asked a similar question. You know, are there any federated learning projects to get involved with? You had mentioned that during your talk. That's one way to kind of access information without, you know, without HIPAA violations, and, you know, if you set it up correctly. Anything in the near future that people can get involved with to increase that data repository?
Yeah, I think we're intending on the imaging study to be one of the federated learning ones, and Teresa and I are trying to push that agenda. And whoever's interested can email me or Teresa, and we'll get involved. It's not just for images being able to transmit it, because that's still sharing data, obviously. We just wanted to do something that is the hardest, so that importing an AI model will be infinitely easier. So we did transmit the echo, so that means anything else is going to be easier, because that's the hardest thing imaginable to transmit. So I think the project after that will be to be able to share an AI model, and then perhaps importing an AI model to see if it can interpret something in your center, and then off we go. So federated learning has only been around for a year or two, so it's still relatively new. But sometimes it's good to just jump onto something really new to obviate the need for data, you know, sharing, which I think makes some people nervous.
Great. There was a question about how many data points do you need, and I know that depends on what question you're asking. What would you recommend for centers that are smaller or that want to get involved?
I think this is one of the biggest challenges, and I think one of my passions is really thinking about how we can improve data sharing. And like Dr. Chang said, I think in some ways thinking about it as a reverse problem, which is that maybe data sharing isn't the way to go, but really thinking about what can we give access to. So can we give access to the algorithm, and then you test out the algorithm at your own institution and just share the results, so that the legal battles of kind of sharing the data and just general patient privacy is a little bit better, but it still ensures that the algorithm that you're developing is generalizable, useful for patients, and doesn't kind of bring in bias from just testing it out on your own institution. In terms of kind of the smaller scale of how do you get started on a project, I think that's definitely one of the challenges. There's a lot of technology now to augment smaller data sets. So it's not that it isn't possible. If you look at the papers that have been published thus far, there's a wide range. There are some papers that have 100,000 still images, and there are others that have 300 patients that they've tested on. So it is possible to do with various types of machine learning to even test within your own institution. But I think in order to really get to the point where we can implement these types of technologies safely, we need to be able to test those algorithms on much larger sets of patients to make sure that they're functioning correctly.
I think one of the exciting things about AI is hopefully it will level the playing field. So if you're a center that you're doing a tenth of what other centers are doing, it won't matter, because you still have data. And it's kind of, I see a few familiar names here, Ben Item and Pierre Wong and Villa Lopez. It's like having that consortium of experts available to interpret your echo. We'll see that within a decade, you know, because it's really knowledge and expertise transfer to interpret echo. So that kind of capability is going to be, I think, a game changer for a lot of places. So, you know, we still struggle sometimes, not only with interpreting difficult echoes within some centers, but also figuring out what to do with those patients. And that's another thing I didn't have time to cover, but the concept of aggregating all the experiences from all the centers to be able to figure out, you know, in terms of probability, what's the best strategy for the patients that are complex, is I think ultimately the sort of reaching nirvana in terms of using AI for congenital cardiology.
Yeah, I think those are some great answers to Anna Circa's question from Connecticut Children's. I'll just wrap up by focusing on the future. You both mentioned kind of what the future will look like. Specifically in 10 years, what do you imagine it will look like in the imaging lab? How will an imaging lab function, you know, hour to hour using AI tools?
Implementing this. Yep.
Exactly.
Actually implementing all of this. Yep.
Yeah. What do you think if you're in the reading room? What will that look like in 10 years?
I think truthfully, the possibilities are somewhat endless. That sounds like really cheesy, but I think it depends on the uptake of how we really go forward when we think about implementing AI, and how people are able to kind of get away from the mistrust that they might have of new technologies. But I think the way that you think about it is, if multiple people develop various algorithms and you're able to test them at your institution, you can easily say, okay, this patient has CCTGA, or this patient, particular to us, maybe TET-PA-MAPKAs or whatever it is, and you have an algorithm that's designed to work in that, it's seamlessly integrated into your workflow, such that you can, and remember, it's in different areas. So whether that's image optimization, you have a patient who has terrible windows, but the machine itself on cart is able to say, hey, move to the left and improve, here's the better window for this patient, or in the past, this is where we got a better picture, here's how to optimize it. Then separately, you can think about kind of how do we implement it in disease stratification. So you think about, Dr. Chang mentioned how each patient will serve as their own control. You can imagine that the same patient has been tested 5 times in the last 6 months. You might say, hey, this is showing, it would be great if the model could say, hey, this is a concerning pattern. Can you take a look at this in a little bit more detail, or correlate it clinically to how the patient is doing, to flag your mind as to say, okay, maybe this patient is more likely to die in the next 6 months, or is less likely to do so. So I kind of envision those kinds of decision support tools, and making the actual process easier for the clinicians kind of performing the tasks.
I think you'll also see using synthetic ways of making up for the deficiencies in an image. So if a patient has 4 windows, the echo will be smart enough to make up the missing parts of the image that will complete the image. So it's also the acquisition. In terms of the scan itself, you'll start to see one of my really cool studies when I was in school was to hybridize an MRI and an echo, which I always kind of wanted to do. So you imagine you're looking at a super scan that has the MRI definition of anatomy, but with the physiologic parameters of an echocardiogram, which is what I ended up getting. So it took a weekend of coding with MATLAB, but hopefully that will be really, really routine, that you get multiple modalities of imaging and you look at it at the same time, so that you're looking at a hybrid image, and that's exciting. And then actually performing the surgery sort of in silico, so that everyone can look at what the results would be with a certain direction of the patch or size of the patch, et cetera. So that's the exciting part. And then ultimately cardiomics, which is multiple planes of information from our patients to make a decision that's the best decision for that patient. Just as an example, this past week had we're all seeing COVID patients with chest pain in our clinic, and sure enough, I knew at some point one kid will come in with a real sort of suspicion for a diagnosis. It was the kid with anomalies right from the left sinus valve. So as we know, we always struggle with that. And wouldn't it be wonderful if dynamic coronary flow studies and everyone's information and outcome can be pulled together to have a really educated response to the parents when they say, what should we do? Right now, we're all just it's educated guesswork at all sort of different levels of experience, but it's really no one has the best answer. And we've been struggling with questions like that for decades. If you look back on the World Congresses in past decades, they're all asking the same questions. So hopefully in this decade or two, and with our younger colleagues here, we're finally able to start getting answers to these questions that are decades old, that we've all been struggling with to improve patient outcome, which is ultimately the North Star.
Right. Thank you both, Dr. Reddy and Dr. Chang. We're almost 15 minutes over with our discussion, so I'll respect everyone's time. I think, what you both have said is exciting, that AI can be incorporated at multiple levels, which many of us, don't recognize, both from decision assistance to, as Dr. Chang has mentioned in the past, augmented intelligence to augment the physician's ability to make decisions, both when there's a lack of data, but also when there's too much. So I'm excited for what the future holds, and I thank both of the speakers for being with us tonight.
Thank you so much
For having us. Bye.
All right. Take care, everyone. We'll see you in
Bye.
January. Have a good night.